Welcome to the Ebbing Archive. Tonight, we journey into the shadows of ancient Rome to explore the quiet, bureaucratic mechanisms of social disgrace. We will examine the concept of infamia, a legal mark of shame that determined who was worthy and who was permanently separated from the polite order of the great Roman world. Let the soft, crackling sound of the fire settle your mind. There is no need for worry here. We are only observing the ancient laws and the distant consequences of social standing. Close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath. In Roman society, your reputation was not merely a matter of gossip or opinion. It was a precise legal status managed by the state. This status determined your right to speak, your right to vote, and even your right to witness a contract. The term infamia translates simply to shame or dishonor. In law, however, it was a formal penalty imposed upon individuals who engaged in certain occupations or committed specific documented acts. It was a permanent stain upon the civic character. It stripped the individual of crucial legal rights without necessarily making them an outlaw. This was not a punishment for a violent crime. Instead, it was an acknowledgement that the individual's chosen way of life had rendered them unfit for public trust. Think of the strange, quiet finality of this process. One day, you possess the full rights of a citizen. The next day, by virtue of your trade, you lose your voice in the public forum. The laws governing infamia were meticulously detailed. They formed a strange ancient list of professions and behaviors deemed incompatible with the dignity of the Roman Republic and later the Empire. The society itself required these trades. The citizens needed the actors, the gladiators, and the prostitutes. But the law was clear. Those who performed them could not be truly Roman. They could not be truly honorable. The regulations were endless. The list of the dishonored was long and slow. The most significant consequence of infamia was the loss of the right to speak in a courtroom. An infamous person could not act as an advocate or a witness in a legal proceeding. Their testimony was considered automatically tainted. Furthermore, an infamous individual was prohibited from standing for public office or voting. These were the quiet civic functions that defined a truly free citizen. When you lose your reputation, you lose your public voice. You lose your ability to shape the world through law. The law created a silent class, a group of necessary people who were barred from participation in the official life of the city. This system provided order. It maintained the facade of a perfectly honorable ruling class while silently regulating the necessary, less savory elements of urban life. Rest now and consider the weight of the law in a world without forgiveness. The fire is warm. The night is long. Your mind is growing still. First on this strange register were the actors. The performers of the stage, regardless of their fame or wealth, were considered to have sacrificed their legal reputation. Acting was seen as a deceptive trade, a public display of falsehood. To represent another person, to change your face and voice for pay, was fundamentally dishonorable to the rigid Roman code. This stigma applied not only to the stage performers, but also to gladiators. the highly trained fighters who risked their lives for public entertainment. The gladiator, though celebrated for his courage, was legally bound by his oath to submit to a master. He was seen as having surrendered his body and his free will. His very existence depended on public spectacle and the will of the crowd. This surrender of self automatically incurred the mark of shame. Imagine the silence that must have settled in the house of a successful actor or a victorious gladiator. Though they had wealth, they had no public voice, no ability to participate in the quiet business of the state. The law also focused on those who manipulated positions of trust. A linocinium, or keeper of a brothel, automatically incurred infamia. This penalty also applied to any person who knowingly leased property for the purpose of prostitution. The shame extended to the landlord. This was based on the perception that they were profiteering from moral degradation. The law viewed their trade as corrupting the public good. Surprisingly, the law did not punish all forms of sexual activity, but specifically punished the professionalization and taxation of it. It was the profit derived from the transaction that created the legal shame. Similarly, auctioneers who handled the sales of bankrupt estates were often branded. They were seen as being too close to the process of financial ruin and social collapse. Also included were mime artists, the entertainers who performed silent, often vulgar, street dramas. Like the actors, their use of deception and disguise was sufficient to strip them of honor. Finally, infamia could be applied through actions within the family. Any woman who was caught in adultery was declared infamous. The law was harsh and meticulously detailed in regulating female behavior. However, the laws were often unequal. While the father of a family who had 2 concurrent legitimate marriages was also sometimes considered infamous. And, perhaps the strangest detail, any person who married an individual already marked by infamia would sometimes inherit the stigma simply by entering the contract. The shame was not only a personal mark, it was a contagious social stain that could quietly spread through contracts and family ties. Rest now under the protection of the fire. Let the strangeness of these ancient regulations fade away. The social order of Rome was built on silence and shame, but you are secure in your rest. We now focus on one of the specific establishments governed by the laws of infamia, the public brothel. The term for a public establishment was the lupanar. It was derived from the Latin word for she-wolf, lupa, a term often applied to the women who worked within. These structures were often deliberately situated in hidden, quiet corners of the city, away from the main public squares and temples. They were found near bourts, markets, and the edges of the city walls. The architecture of these places was highly distinctive. The interiors were often dark and narrow, designed for function and speed rather than comfort or elegance. Consider the layout of a known lupanar in the city of Pompeii. It featured 2 small stories connected by a narrow staircase. The halls were dimly lit by small oil lamps. The rooms themselves were tiny, no more than small cubic cells. They were designed with a single permanent feature, a stone couch built directly into the wall. This stone couch was covered only by a thin, rough mattress or cushion. The permanence of the stone ensured the room was easily cleaned and quickly ready for the next visitor. Imagine the sound of footsteps on the stone floor, the echo in the narrow hallway. Everything was built for efficiency and hard use. Above the entrance to each small room the architects installed a small, explicit fresco or painting. These images acted as a kind of silent menu, depicting the specialty of the woman inside for the illiterate customer. This strange system of silent, visual advertising was a unique feature of the Roman social machine. The function of the establishment was made perfectly clear through these mute images. The operations of the lupanar were heavily regulated by the Roman state. They were not illegal, they were simply dishonorable. The women who worked here were subject to a special, distinct form of taxation. This tax officially acknowledged their trade and simultaneously reinforced their lack of civic honor. The state did not ignore the trade, it profited from its existence while simultaneously placing the participants outside the bounds of respectable society. Think of the tax collectors moving slowly through the back streets, collecting the state's share of the shame. This was the quiet, financial weight of Infamia. The clothes worn by the workers were also regulated. They were often required to wear a dark, short tunic, a distinctive garment that instantly marked their profession to anyone they encountered on the street. The Roman world was visually defined by clothing, and this regulation served as a permanent, quiet, and unavoidable declaration of their low social status. The Roman state managed its dishonorable trades not just through law, but through meticulous economics. The pricing of the services was frequently fixed by imperial decree. This fixed pricing was another way the authorities exerted quiet control over a chaotic element of the city. The prices were remarkably low, often the price of a single, simple loaf of bread. The currency used was the ass. 4 asses equaled 1 sestertius. The payment for the services was typically a single copper ass, or perhaps 2 asses, depending on the period. This low cost was deliberate. It ensured the service was accessible to the vast majority of the Roman male population, from slaves to the poorest citizens. Imagine the quiet transfer of the smallest copper coins, a continuous low-level financial exchange that occurred endlessly in the back rooms of the city. Despite the low individual price, the linosinium, or keeper of the establishment, managed to accumulate significant wealth. The key was volume and the exploitation of the low wages paid to the workers. The majority of the money did not remain with the individual woman. Instead, it was remitted to the keeper or the owner of the slaves. The low price kept the system fluid. The fixed costs were predictable: the rent, the oil for the small lamps, and the fees paid to the state tax collector. This economic reality reinforced the shame of Infamia. It showed that the trade was simply a system of generating predictable revenue for the owners and for the state treasury. It was an economy based on a fast turnover of the smallest possible copper coins, occurring far from the large, noisy forums where senators traded in silver and gold. The strange duality of Roman morality was on full display in the lupanar. While the laws decreed infamia for the workers, the citizens who used the services were generally not subject to any legal penalty. The male Roman citizen was considered to be acting within acceptable social bounds, provided he maintained his decorum and avoided public scandal. The shame was exclusively assigned to the sellers of the service, never the buyers. This silent, vast hypocrisy was another way the elite maintained their own sense of dignity while ensuring the availability of the service. The Roman world required
required the shame of some to ensure the supposed honor of others. This system maintained the rigid, visible order that the Romans valued above all else. The laws were clear. What was purchased was merely a service. What was sold was permanent social standing. We have now completed our quiet examination of Infamia and the architecture of shame. The initial curiosity has been satisfied. You are now fully immersed in the long, slow, and dark quiet of the ancient world. The regulations, the copper coins, and the silent status of the dishoured have all settled. The fire continues its gentle work. Your mind is still. You have crossed the threshold into deep rest. We will soon move into the next phase of our historical journey, looking at other aspects of Roman life subject to bizarre, meticulous laws. But for now, let the quiet weight of history carry you towards sleep. As we move deep into our journey, we step inside the Roman home, the Domus. Here, the laws governing public life and shame gave way to the supreme internal power of the family head. This authority was known as Patria Potestas, or the power of the father. It was the single most absolute legal concept in all of Roman life. The head of the household, the pater familias, held this power over every member of his family. This included his wife, his children, his adopted children, and his grandchildren. The power was total. It was not merely symbolic, it was a complete legal control over the lives and property of everyone beneath him. Think of the long, strange reach of Patria Potestas. In a legal sense, any member of the family beneath this power could not own property. Everything acquired by a son, even a married adult son, legally belonged to the paterfamilias. The son could run a business, command a legion, or hold a minor office, but the profits belonged to his father. This legal arrangement remained in place until the death of the father. Only upon the father's death did the adult children, regardless of their age, suddenly become sui juris, or of their own law. Imagine a man in his 50s, a respected military commander who still had to legally ask his 80-year-old father for permission to spend the money he himself had earned. This was the quiet, invisible chain that bound the most powerful citizens of Rome. This legal structure emphasized duty, obedience, and the complete submission of the individual to the family unit. In the earliest periods of Roman history, Patria Potestas extended even further, including the power of life and death. The paterfamilias theoretically held the right to sell his children into slavery. He held the right to reject an infant at birth. He even retained the archaic, theoretical power to execute an adult son. While these extreme powers rarely, if ever, occurred in later civilized Rome, the legal right to hold them always remained on the books. The Roman state, so meticulous in its laws regarding the street and the forum, deliberately refused to intrude upon the absolute, quiet jurisdiction of the father within his own walls. The sanctity of the home was the absolute power of the paterfamilias. The state would not interfere with this foundation of its order. Rest now under the gentle crackling of the fire. Allow the strange, quiet weight of this ancient authority to settle over your thoughts. You are safe. The law is distant, and your rest is paramount. We continue inside the Roman home, observing the subtle legal contracts that created and dissolved the family unit. Roman marriage
was often a far simpler and quieter affair than we might imagine. There were two primary types of marriage, legally defined by the transfer of power over the woman. The first, older form, was called cum manu, or with the hand. In this marriage, the woman legally passed from the control of her father, the pater familias, directly into the control of her husband. She became legally subordinate to her husband, as if she were his own daughter. However, over time, this form faded. It was replaced by a second, far more common structure called sin manu, or without the hand. The sin manu marriage was remarkable for its simplicity. In this form, the wife legally remained under the control of her own birth family's pater familias. She did not pass into her husband's power. The marriage itself was established by the simple intent of the couple to live together as husband and wife. There was often no priest, no civil ceremony, and no formal documentation required by the state. The core legal component was cohabitation and the mutual will to be married. Imagine the quiet, subtle beginning of a Roman marriage. No fanfare, no dramatic vows, simply the man and woman agreeing to share a home and announcing their intention to their family. This legal simplicity made the process of ending the marriage equally quiet and simple.
In the Roman legal system, divorce was incredibly easy, particularly by the later Republican and imperial eras. Just as marriage was established by intent, it was dissolved by the simple cessation of intent. A divorce could be initiated by either the husband or the wife. All that was required was a statement, a simple notification to the other party that the marriage was over. The most famous phrase used was often, "Take your property and go." There was no court appearance required, no judge to rule on the dissolution. The quiet ending was achieved by sending a messenger, or simply stating the fact. This meant that divorce among the Roman elite, who often married for political or financial reasons, was common, silent, and entirely bureaucratic. A powerful Roman senator might quietly divorce his wife in the morning and be remarried by the afternoon, all without involving the state. The entire affair was handled by private legal agents and notaries. Let the easy, almost silent dissolution of these ancient bonds soothe your mind. The weight of commitment was surprisingly light. You are safe and secure as these ancient contracts fade away. We continue our journey under the shadow of Patria Potestas, the absolute power of the father. This authority dictated the legal status of children from the moment of their birth. When a child was born, it was placed on the floor of the atrium. The pater familias had to perform a symbolic act. He had to lift the child from the floor, acknowledging it as his own. If he refused to lift the child, the infant was deemed exposed, meaning the father was not legally obligated to raise it. This quiet, simple refusal was the final decision on the child's right to life. In later Roman society, this practice faded, but the power of the father over the child remained legally supreme throughout the son or daughter's entire life. The concept of adoption in Rome was far more than simply finding a new parent for an orphaned child. It was a profound legal transfer of the Patria Potestas itself. A powerful man with no sons would adopt an adult, often a younger relative or a brilliant political ally, to ensure his line continued. This act of adoption was meticulously detailed. It required that the adult to be adopted must first be legally released from his original father's Patria Potestas. often through the strange triple sale ritual we just discussed. The adoption was a quiet, complex legal event that fundamentally altered the political and financial structure of two powerful families. It was often done for the simple, quiet purpose of inheritance and legacy. Rest now and allow the complex, methodical nature of the Roman law to gently guide your mind into stillness. The legal forms are finalized. The contracts are signed. You are secure in the quiet of the present moment. As we emerge from the Roman home, we find that the laws of social standing continued to govern every interaction, every piece of clothing, and every meal. The Romans had unspoken rules of conduct that, if broken, could lead to public ridicule and a quiet, slow loss of social face, even if they did not result in a legal declaration of infamia. Consider the act of the Roman dinner party, the convivium. The rules of seating were strangely precise, determining a citizen's relative honor. Guests did not sit at a table. They reclined upon triclinia, 3 couches arranged in a U shape. Each couch held 3 people. The most honored guest was always placed in the position known as the locus consularis, or the place of the consul. This seat was specifically reserved for the individual of greatest dignity. Being seated incorrectly, being placed in a lower status seat than your rank deserved, was considered a subtle form of public shame. The entire arrangement of the room was a silent, meticulous social test. Imagine the quiet anxiety of the guests trying to determine their rank and secure their proper spot on the couch. Every dinner was a silent, meticulous ranking of social standing. The visual display of rank was also codified by strict, strange laws regarding clothing. The most telling detail was the color and width of the purple stripe worn on the tunic. This stripe was called the clavis. Only senators and magistrates were permitted to wear a wide purple stripe known as the latus clavis. Equestrians, the rank below the senators, were allowed a narrower stripe, the angustus clavis. This specific visual detail of color and width was a permanent, quiet, and unavoidable declaration of one's legal standing in the city. To wear the wrong width was an instant social offense. Think of the vast expense required to dye the cloth with Tyrian purple, a color reserved only for the very highest status. This simple stripe was the visible mark of quiet power.
Even the growth of facial hair was controlled by custom and silent social law. During the Republic, most Roman men went clean-shaven. The beard was generally associated with mourning or with the philosophical, less structured life of the Greeks. A young man would ceremonially shave for the first time, a quiet, personal rite of passage into adulthood. And this act was often celebrated with a small private festival. However, during times of great public distress or mourning, such as the death of a beloved emperor, all men would stop shaving as a public, quiet display of shared grief. The simple choice of whether to shave or not was a constant, subtle communication of one's social and emotional state to the rest of the city. Every element of Roman life, from family to fashion, was governed by a law of shame or honor. Let the fire continue its gentle work. Your mind is quiet. You are secure in your rest,
as the slow passage of time carries you toward deep sleep. We leave the meticulous laws of ancient Rome and journey forward in time to the cold, quiet stone walls of a medieval monastery. Here, the law was not set by the emperor, but by the written rule of Saint Benedict, a document that dictated every moment of the monastic life. The most profound and strange law was the rule of silence. In many hours of the day and night, particularly in the church, the refectory or dining hall, and the dormitories, absolute silence was required. The purpose was spiritual, to avoid idle chatter and to keep the mind focused only on God and prayer. Imagine living day after day in a world where necessary communication was prohibited by a holy vow. The only sounds heard were the slow chanting of the services and the quiet shuffling of sandaled feet on stone. Because communication was often necessary, the monks developed a highly detailed and bizarre replacement for spoken language. This was a complex system of hand signs known as the signa. These signs were used to ask for the most mundane, ordinary objects without breaking the sacred rule of silence. Imagine the quiet, subtle conversation that occurred between monks at the dinner table. To ask for bread, one might make a gesture symbolizing the breaking of the bread. To ask for wine, one would gently place a finger against the corner of the mouth. To ask for a fish, one would softly move the hand to mimic the waving of a tail. This sign language could be incredibly detailed. It contained hundreds of gestures for specific prayers, books, and even types of food. This quiet, systematic replacement of speech meant that the strange laws of the monastery created an entire self-contained world of silent, gestural communication. The energy of the conversation was forced into the slow movement of the hands, a highly visual but completely silent exchange. Let the gentle wind and the distant rain outside the stone walls bring you into the absolute quiet of the ancient monastery. Your mind is growing still. There is no need for your voice here.
We now move to the scriptorium, the quietest and most sacred room in the entire monastery. This was the place where the monks worked to copy and preserve ancient texts. The labor performed here was essential. Without the slow, meticulous work of the monks, much of the classical literature and ancient knowledge would have been lost to time. This work required extreme patience and absolute stillness. The only sound permitted was the quiet scratching of the quill on the parchment. Imagine the atmosphere, cold, dimly lit by a single window or a small candle, with the quietest rhythm of the quill moving slowly across the page. The monks were bound by silence here. To ask for a specific color of ink or a tool, they would use the signa, the hand language we discussed earlier. To signal for a book, they would make a gesture of turning a page and then add a subtle gesture to describe the subject matter. This quiet, dedicated focus on preserving ancient words stands in strange contrast to the noisy, chaotic world outside the monastery walls. The rule of Saint Benedict also governed the consumption of food in a surprisingly strict and repetitive manner. Monks ate their 2 daily meals, a light dinner and supper, in absolute silence in the refectory. The silence was so strict that to ask for a cup to drink, one might point to the cup and then make a sign as if drinking softly. During the entire meal, one monk would stand and read aloud from the scripture. The content of the meal was often regulated to be simple and slightly tedious to discourage gluttony. If a monk broke the rule of silence with an outburst or a loud word, or if he committed any other transgression, the punishment was often solitary and quiet. Penalties often involved a period of solitary separation from the community. The monk might be made to eat his meals alone, segregated at a small, separate table. He might be forbidden from participating in the communal prayer or the copying work in the scriptorium. The punishment was not physical pain, but the acute, quiet loss of community. The purpose was to force the individual to confront his mistake in solitude and silence, relying on reflection rather than external correction. Rest now, within the quiet sanctuary of the monastery walls. The laws here are strange, but they promise stillness. Let the soft, distant sound of the rain bring you deep security and rest.
We now turn to one of the most perplexing and strange legal customs of medieval Europe, the practice of formally putting animals on trial for criminal offenses. From the 13th through the 18th centuries, records show numerous instances where animals, pigs, cows, rats, even insects, were arrested, brought before human courts, and tried under human law. This practice reflected a strange intersection of law, superstition, and faith. People truly believed that animals could be held legally responsible for their actions. The most common defendant in these bizarre trials was the pig. The pig was often tried for attacking and killing an infant or small child left unattended. The trial was meticulous and completely formal. The pig would be held in a local jail. A formal complaint would be filed with the local court. The pig would be brought into the courtroom, sometimes dressed in human clothes, to emphasize its role as a defendant. A defense attorney would often be appointed by the court to argue on the pig's behalf. Imagine the quiet solemnity of the medieval courtroom, the judge in his robes, the witnesses giving testimony, the lawyer presenting his quiet, formal defense of the animal. The trial would proceed with the same legal rigor as a trial against a human. The court would consider evidence, witness testimony, and precedents. If found guilty, the pig would be sentenced to death, often by hanging or burning, and the execution was carried out with the same solemnity as a human execution. Even more strange were the trials of swarms of insects or rodents, such as caterpillars, locusts, or rats, accused of destroying crops. These cases were handled by ecclesiastical courts, or church courts, rather than civil courts. The procedure was different, but equally formal. The church authorities would formally excommunicate the pests. They would appoint a lawyer for the insects, and if the lawyer failed to secure an acquittal, a series of specific legal warnings would be issued. The insects would be told to peacefully leave the county within a specific number of days, or they would be subjected to the full spiritual penalties of the church. This was a quiet, desperate attempt by the community to control the natural world using the only weapon they had, the absolute power of the law and the Word of God. Rest now, under the protection of the soft wind. Let the strange, detailed laws of the past fade away. Your mind is quiet. You are secure in your rest.
We have reached the quiet end of our journey through the strange and precise laws of ancient Rome and the curious customs of the medieval world. We have walked through the dark, narrow alleys governed by Infamia, where every profession was strictly ranked by shame. We observed the silent power of the Patria Potestas, the father's absolute authority over his family and property. We listened to the quiet scratching of the quill in the monastic scriptorium, where silence was the most sacred rule. And we finished by witnessing the strange, meticulous laws that govern the trials of animals and insects, where the boundaries between the human world and the natural world blurred. All the meticulous regulations, all the strange, quiet judgments have settled now. They are part of the deep past. Your mind is released from the need to actively process any new information. The curiosity has been satisfied. Allow the gentle sound of the wind and the rain to wash away any remaining tension. Feel the weight leaving your body. The laws in the cities of the ancient world are far away. You are safe. You are secure. The quiet, gentle rhythm of the rain will continue to protect your rest throughout the night. Drift down now. Sink into the deep, absolute quiet that awaits you. Rest well.